Good afternoon, everybody. As Jay said, my name is Stanley Parrott. I'm a detection engineer at Deloitte. So I write code to catch bad guys. Objective of most security organizations is to make nothing happen. It's the reason why I put it on my t-shirt. If nothing happens, then you're doing good. If a little bit happens, then you're doing okay. And then if a bunch happens, then it's going to be a bad day for everybody. So we got about 20 minutes. I want to talk to the history and kind of like where we are in SIEM and SOC operations today, or where we were. Then we're going to talk about where we are, and then we're going to talk about where we're going to go. So I'm going to cover 20 years of history and solve all of your security problems in 18 minutes and 37 seconds, okay? So let's go to work. At the turn of the century, because we can say that now, at the turn of the century, security was really a game of whack-a-mole with the threat actor, right? And the security products that were out there were all very segmented. They did their thing and they did their own, and that's all they did, right? So you had your AV, and it had this big long list of signatures, and every time a process or a binary was ran, it would bump it against that list of signatures, and if the hash matched, then it was bad, and you killed it, and that was all it was. And it was this huge arms race to who had the longest signature list, right? And I used AVs there, but your firewall was the same thing. Passwords being locked out was a similar thing, if there was even a lockout policy. But tools really were just like, hey, I'm going to protect an endpoint. I'm going to protect a network device, and that was it. And then we also had this weird situation where we had these tools. They did a lot of things, but it didn't connect any information. And so we had the first advent of a SIEM, right? And whatever that meant. And so it was like, hey, we want to put all of these things in a single place. And so we tried to do that, but the problem there is we have all of this stuff, and it was kind of like when the dog chases the car. It's like, if the dog ever caught the car, it wouldn't know what to do with it. There wasn't a lot of contextual information added to it. And then on top of all of that, once all the data was in our SIEM, we're like, you know what we need to do? We need to tell the SIEM what all the bad things are. So I'm going to take this tip and I'm going to dump it into my SIEM, and it's all going to magically work. And that was right around, like tips started getting really popular around 12, 13, 14. And then once that happened, everybody in the SOC, do I have any operators, like people that were working in the SOC at that point in time? Just me? Okay. What happened at that point in time was your SIEM, your alert mechanism would go bananas because somebody did a Google search and some puppy went to pulled a picture from a domain, because Google loads all those domains. They would go across your firewall, and you had to chase down why somebody was searching puppies on their work computer, and it wasn't actually evil at all, right? And so you ended up with these thousands of alerts that didn't really do anything, and it just caused a bad day for everybody, right? And so right around then, so now we're kind of in the 15, 16, 17 range, right? And SOAR came out, and we're like, hey, we're gonna automate everything. And then because we're gonna automate all of these things, it's just gonna magically work, right? Well, the problem with automation, and we're going to talk about AI too, is not that automation or AI or any of those things are bad. It's that it automates whatever it is you're doing, right? It automates you. It's an accelerator of you or your organization. And so if you don't have the tradecraft and methodology to facilitate what you're automating, it's going to automate you off a cliff instead of automating you to not having anything happen in your environment. And so what we put together, and so as we started figuring out how to solve this problem, we put together a reference architecture, and there's a lot here, but we're gonna cut it up in bite-sized pieces, and we're gonna talk to kind of how we think through what a SIEM looks like, what a next-gen SIEM is, and kind of what the next iteration of SOC operations are gonna look like and why it matters, right? So first, instead of starting with your security tool, which is where most people start with, right? So I say I'm a detection engineer. The first question anybody asks me at any point in time is, which SIEM, which tool? They don't talk about which bad guy. They don't talk about which TTP or what assets I'm protecting. It's always, what tool do you have? Well, let's throw that out, and let's start with what we're actually protecting. And so over here on the far left, you see this identity fabric, this dynamic context, right? Ooh, sorry. Because, so what we're looking at there and what we're really trying to understand is, what are you writing, what are the bad guys gonna come after? And you can just assume they're gonna come after everything you have. And of course there's priorities there and like what's actually important and what's not. But from that far left side, you really need to start off with what exists here. Because if you don't know what's in your environment, then you can't protect what's in your environment, right? And then it's a bad day for everybody. And so from your identity fabric and your dynamic context, you kind of go into the assets, right? So you got who's using your environment and what's going on there, and then you kind of have what they're doing it on. So it's who and then what are they doing it on. And so those are your endpoints, it's your network, it's your servers, it's your actual email server or your email service, however that works out for you. And once you have all of those things, the thing you'll start to notice is, one, there's a lot that you don't know about your network. And two, it's really hard to ask really specific questions about what those assets look like or what those people are actually doing in your environment. And so instead of starting with and saying, hey, give me all of your endpoints, because that's a bit of a myopic question, somebody will be like, hey, these are all the laptops I have in an environment. Well, what about your servers or what about your firewalls? I think in the last 18 months, about 7 RCEs have been released for various firewalls that exist out there. And most people are not pulling the system telemetry from their firewalls, right? You're not ingesting that telemetry. And so we created this concept of, and I don't want to say created, we started talking about endpoints and assets in this framework of like telemetry domains. And so what that allows you to do is it allows you to separate your assets out into very bite-sized pieces where you get into binary questions and question and answer with your IT operations organizations, right? So at the first one, let's say endpoints. What communicates on the network? And if it communicates on the network, are we collecting telemetry from that which is communicating on the network? And the answer is very much yes or no. Like, do we have all of those things? And if we don't have all of those things, then what don't we have and why don't we have it? Are we not collecting the telemetry from our firewalls because we can't put an agent on there? Well, maybe we need to talk about syslog, or we need to talk about what that log forwarder looks like there. Love the cloud. Are we collecting all of the endpoints or all of our virtual devices that exist in the cloud? Well, maybe we need to talk about how we build those devices. What is our Terraform? Are we going out and pulling agents to make sure all of the new stuff, even the stuff in development, actually has some type of security tooling on it so that we can collect what's going on there? And it goes down through the whole stack, right? So whether that's an application, whether it's an email, like there are very clear questions that you should be asking for each of those domains. And because those domains will then create a bucket for you to have a really clear conversation about. So for network, ingress and egress points. Are we watching all of the places all of the doors to our network? And sometimes there's point-to-point VPNs, and the cloud has kind of made that question a little bit more complex than me just securing the edges of my boundary or my data center. But at the end of the day, I can still ask a really clear question of, am I monitoring all of the ways in and out of my network? And if I'm not, then which ones am I not monitoring and why am I not monitoring them, right? And so once you get through that, or as you start to work through that, because it's never actually done, as you start to figure out what you're monitoring and what you're not monitoring, you kind of get into this light purple box, right? And we call it a security data platform. All of the things inside of this are our security engine. I call it my little engine that can. Because if you build it right, you should be able to do and facilitate all of your security operations, right? So first step, all things need to go through some type of ETL thing, right? Whether it's a platform, whether it's just a collection of Kafka devices. At this point, if you're doing ETL and you're actually monitoring and managing your data flow and what goes where, then you're ahead. You're winning, right? Give yourself a pat on the back, let's go. But streaming that data, making sure that it's transformed and that it's loaded in places that it needs to be loaded into, because the next step is that your data should actually probably be going into one of two places. It should either be going into your alerting interface, we'll talk about what that is in a second, or it should be going into your data lake. Now, your alerting interface, and we were actually talking about this earlier, is probably the closest thing we have to what I would call hot storage for your data. You want it to be fast because that's where your SOC is going to be hanging out in. They're going to be doing a lot of queries there. You want the responses to be fairly snappy. You don't want your analysts to go through and kick off a query, however they kick off that query, and wait 20 minutes for an answer in the middle of an incident, right? You want that to be pretty quick. Part of the problem there is if you've just dumped everything into it, it's going to naturally slow everything down. And doing fast searches, having all of that data stored hotly, it's kind of expensive, so you want to keep the cost down there. Because when you're doing security as a cost center, you don't actually want to be a pain in anybody's back. You want to make people happy with the outcomes that you're generating. And then from the data lake perspective, I can't say this enough. One of the biggest differences as we look at what next-gen SIEM actually means versus the previous generation of SIEMs is the existence of a data lake. We are rapidly approaching a place now where the amount of data that we're generating is so large, it's so big that if you don't have a data lake, you're probably not collecting all of the things that could be useful. And just from a collection perspective, you'd much rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And so if you don't have a data lake, if you don't have a meaningful mechanism to store all of that data, then you're going to get yourself in a situation where you want to write an analytic, you want to write a detection, but you can't because you're not collecting all of that data. And our alerting interface is the place where we put our expensive data, and our data lake's the place where we put our cheap data. So it should be a cost-effective mechanism in which we can store all of that, right? Now, second part of a next generation SIEM, and the second portion of importance here, is your alerting interface and your data lake need to become best friends. And not like best friends I call you once a month, like best friends like if I don't talk to you 3 or 4 times a day, my day's wrong. Like you gotta be really close here, right? Your alerting mechanism should be able to query your data lake it doesn't have to be as fast as if it wasn't an incident, but your alerting interface should be aware of what's going on in your data lake. It should be able to reach in, it should be able to pull that out, and should be able to answer some questions about what data you're collecting or the current status of your environment as a whole. Once you get those relationships figured out and nailed down, the place that you end up, you now have this security engine, this cybersecurity engine that will facilitate a lot of your activities. Now it's not, do I need this data? Do I need this mechanism? Because it's already built. Now it's, what am I going to do next, right? And so that's what we have on the security operations tool side of the house, right? I threw tools up there, but really it's anything that you could think of. At the bottom, we have APIs and direct connections. We got some data scientists that I work with, and they love to just pick apart my data. I want them to play in my data. I just don't want them to play in my data in my operational environment. And so that's where those API connections come from. That's where those direct connections come from. Everybody loves to talk AI, they want to talk models, they want to talk, hey, is this model good, is this model bad? That's down there, that's going to exist on top of your data lake. If you try to write an AI model and you don't have a data lake, your AI model is not going to do a lot of good things for you. It's not going to be helpful because it's going to be trained on data that's not real. And so there's going to be hallucinations, you're going to have to retweak everything, and at that point in time, your detection engineer is going to show up and say, hey, I can just write a detection for this for a lot easier and a lot faster, and I promise it'll work better. The other thing that happens is, and this is a new portion, I don't want to say new portion, but one of the things that I've noticed as we start having these more encompassing data platforms is that observability becomes this really valuable asset. All of a sudden, your security team starts to know more about your network than everybody else does, right? We may not know why this API is making all these calls from a database, but we know that it is. Because we're writing detections that are supposed to be upper and lower and bounding, like, hey, anything outside of what's normal is weird, and we need to alert what's weird because we don't want anything to happen in our network, right? And so when we start getting into what this business intelligence looks like, this observability piece, that exists on top of your data lake, and it gets really exciting because now your security team starts asking really important questions like, hey, why does this backup service have permanent global domain admin rights to everything in the environment? It doesn't really need that, and if it does need it for a second, then we should turn it off the rest of the time. Or better yet, I actually just wrote a detection a couple of weeks ago where it takes the stuff from your endpoint, like new account creations from your network, and slams it against your identity management piece and says, if there's a new account created that doesn't go through your identity system, well, that's not good, so let's stop that. And so that's what starts happening whenever you get into that security tools piece, right? And then, of course, on the far right, now we're in the pure operations. I called out this inside of Deloitte. I work inside defense and resilience because that's what we do. But from an operational piece, we leverage the whole engine that can to do these operations, right? So when we start having these conversations about can you write detections for us or can you do an IR for us, one of our first questions is going to be, how is your data structured? How does this stuff stored? My IR person's over there nodding her head because she agrees with me because we've been in this place. Like, we want to know, we want to make sure that all that data is stored, because whenever something bad happens, you don't want to be stuck asking who's on first or where this data is. It's the wrong time to figure out your data strategy in the middle of an IR, right? So all of this stuff we build, at the top you saw that was cloud native. We do that for availability, we do it for resilience. ConvergeSECURITY is very specifically the relationship that we have with AWS, where they give us a nice little engine and we build a bunch of things on top of it, and we partner to deliver all of these services and things for our clients. And so that's what ConvergeSECURITY is for us. That's my time, everybody. Thank you so much. I will be around if there's any questions. You guys have a great day.